Dolly Parton isn't just the queen of country music, she's the soul of America. For more than 6 decades, her voice has been a sanctuary for the brokenhearted, a lighthouse for the weary, and a warm hand reaching out through the radio to remind us we're not alone. But tonight, that voice, the one that gave us Jolene, 9 to 5, and I Will Always Love You, stands at the edge of silence. In the quiet hours of the night, her sister Frida Parton shared a haunting post. I was up all night praying for my sister Dolly. She hasn't been feeling her best lately. I'm asking the world to pray with me. No publicity, no stage, just fear, real, raw, and trembling from someone who knows her soul best. The woman who sang through sorrow, who built an empire from the hills of Tennessee, now faces what may be her hardest season yet. The lights in Las Vegas are dimmed. Her show's postponed. The crowd's waiting. And still, she hasn't said much. But sometimes silence speaks louder than song. And when a legend goes quiet, the world listens. So before we begin, take a moment. Light a candle. Whisper a prayer. Because this isn't just a story about fame or music. It's a story about survival. A story about a girl who sang her way out of the mountains. A woman who turned grief into grace. And a legend who even now continues to give, even as the world wonders if we are nearing her final verse. Dolly Rebecca Parton didn't grow up with silver spoons or soft landings. She was born on January 19, 1946, in the deep hollows of Sevier County, Tennessee, where the wind howled through pine trees like a warning and hunger was a daily visitor. Her first lullaby wasn't sung. It was whispered by the wind brushing against a one-room cabin with no electricity, no running water, and barely enough warmth to fight off the mountain frost. That night, her mother, Dolly Parton, lay under a fraying quilt with sweat on her brow and cold pressing through the thin wood like a ghost. The doctor who delivered Dolly was paid in a sack of cornmeal. That was all they had, 12 children. One blanket, no shoes, just skin pressed against skin in the dark, trying to stay warm. Dolly would later say, "That was the only warm thing we knew." Winters in the Smoky Mountains didn't knock. They sank their teeth into the bones. The wind crept under doors. The cold was alive. Baths came in the freezing river, food in thin bowls of beans, and smoke lingered in their hair long after the firewood burned out. But through it all, there was music. Music in the rhythm of survival. Music in the breath her mother sang while cooking. In the scratch of her father's hands working through pain without complaint. Robert Lee Parton couldn't read or write, but his hands were poetry, cracked, calloused, steady. He hauled gravel and chopped wood from before the sun rose to after it disappeared behind the hills. Eileen was 35 with 12 mouths to feed. Her hands never stopped sewing, stirring, comforting. She moved like a hymn, one stitched from sacrifice and silence. By 6 years old, Dolly had joined their rhythm, fetching water, rocking babies, stirring pots over the wood stove. No toys, no dolls. Just chores and church, and the quiet understanding that love meant labor, and faith didn't need luxury to survive. What they lacked in money, they carried in spirit. And what most would call poverty, Dolly wore like armor, because the mountain didn't just raise her, it forged her. In the winter of 1955, when Dolly was just 9 years old, the cold in the mountains seemed sharper than ever, as if even nature could sense that sorrow was on its way. Her baby brother Larry came into the world too soon and left it just 4 days later. There was no funeral, no procession, just a small patch of earth behind the family cabin, covered in frost, where love and grief met in silence. No one talked about it. Her father went back to work the next morning. Her mother, Lee, sat in stillness, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes fixed on nothing. Grief was not spoken in that home. It was carried, quietly, like a stone in the pocket. Dolly didn't understand death, but she understood absence. The sound that wasn't there anymore. The stillness in her mother's voice when she tried to hum a hymn. The air felt different, heavier. That silence became her first teacher, the kind that doesn't use words but leaves marks that last a lifetime. Years later, when she wrote her early songs, the melodies came soft, like whispers in the dark. She once said that some of her songs were conversations with people I lost. Maybe, in a way, she was still singing to Larry, the baby who never got to grow up, the first soul she ever had to say goodbye to. That loss did something to her. It turned her small voice into something sacred. She sang, not just to be heard, but to fill the silence that death had left behind. It was the first time she learned that music could heal, that it could give shape to sorrow. While other children played outside, Dolly sat by the window, humming songs she didn't yet have words for. Songs that carried prayers, pain, and something only the mountains could understand. And though she rarely spoke of it, that 4-day life changed the course of her own. Because from that moment on, every song she wrote carried a heartbeat that wasn't hers. It was just a coat. Scraps of cloth stitched together by a tired mother's hands. But for Dolly Parton, it became the first garment she ever wore that carried both love and humiliation stitched into every thread. One winter morning, her mother, A. Lee, gathered old fabric pieces from neighbors, relatives, anything she could find. She worked late into the night, sewing by the glow of a kerosene lamp, whispering stories to Dolly about what each patch meant. "This red came from your uncle's shirt," she'd say. "This blue used to be mine." Every stitch was a prayer. Every seam a piece of her heart. When Dolly wore the coat to school, her mother's words still warmed her. But the other children didn't see love, they saw rags. They laughed, pointing, mocking the bright colors that stood out in the cold, gray classroom. Their laughter cut deeper than the wind that bit her legs on the walk home. Her chin trembled, but she held it high. She didn't run. She didn't cry until the forest swallowed her footsteps. That humiliation could have hardened her. But Dolly was already learning what made her different would one day make her extraordinary. Years later, she turned that memory into a song, Coat of Many Colors. A hymn of childhood innocence and maternal sacrifice. A melody that carried the weight of that day and turned it into something holy. It became one of her most iconic songs, but it wasn't easy for her to perform. After her mother passed in 2003, Dolly said she could hardly get through the verses. "It was her hands I was singing about," she whispered. And her heart. The coat that once brought shame would eventually clothe her in glory. Because that's what Dolly always did. She took the things that broke her and turned them into blessings. And in that patchwork coat, stitched from scraps and suffering, the world saw not poverty, but pride. The morning she left home, there was no applause. No crowd. Just Dolly standing on a dirt road at sunrise, a cardboard suitcase in one hand and a $20 bill in the other. Her high school graduation had barely ended before she climbed onto a Greyhound bus headed for Nashville. Behind her, the Smoky Mountains slowly faded in the rearview mirror, taking with them the only life she'd ever known. Ahead, a city that promised everything and gave nothing without a fight. Nashville welcomed her with neon lights and cold shoulders. Producers smiled at her twang, patted her shoulder, called her darlin', and told her she was too mountain. Too raw, too much. They handed her sweet, forgettable pop songs and told her to smooth out the edges. Make herself smaller, softer, more palatable. She sang them anyway because a hungry girl can't afford pride. But every note she recorded felt like a lie dressed in rhinestones. "I felt like I was wearing someone else's skin," she'd later confess. And when the singles failed, the phone stopped ringing. The label cooled. But Dolly didn't. During the day, she sang in smoky bars where no one clapped. At night, she scribbled lyrics on receipts and grocery bags by candlelight when the electricity was cut off. Her hands were blistered, her stomach ached, and her voice trembled from exhaustion. But she kept writing. Not for fame. For survival, then a miracle. In 1966, a song she co-wrote with her uncle Bill Owens, Put It Off Until Tomorrow, hit #1. Not her voice, not yet, but her words. And suddenly people started asking, "Who is Dolly Parton?" In 1967, she answered loud and clear. "Hello, I'm Dolly" wasn't just an album title, it was a declaration. These weren't fantasy songs. They were scraped from hunger, stitched with sorrow, and powered by a girl who had once sung to the wind just to hear herself survive. the world still underestimated her. They saw the curves, the hair, the smile, but they didn't see the steel. And when they told her to stay in her place, she sharpened her pen. When they tried to cage her in a duet partner role, she wrote the softest rebellion country music had ever heard. I Will Always Love You. Not a breakup song. A release, a quiet farewell that forgave and freed. The kind of song only a woman who had walked away from everything and survived could write. Some griefs turn into songs. Others leave you silent. Floyd Parton wasn't just Dolly's brother. He was her reflection in melody. From childhood, the two shared more than blood. They shared verses, unfinished lyrics, whispered dreams. In the hills of Locust Ridge, they sat side by side with a battered guitar and scraps of notebook paper, trading lines like lullabies, their voices braided together by something deeper than talent. Floyd wasn't loud. He didn't chase the spotlight. But his name quietly echoed through her discography, songs like Rockin' Years, which climbed to #1 in 1991, bore his fingerprints. Then, in December 2018, the harmony stopped. Floyd died at just 61, no warning, no curtain call. Just a stillness Dolly couldn't put into words. There were no televised tributes, no grand stages, just a small chapel in the Tennessee hills, where the Parton family gathered not as stars, but as siblings. They sang Rockin' Years one last time. No rehearsal, no instruments, only trembling voices and tears that refused to be wiped away. After that, something shifted. Friends said Dolly kept working, but her light dimmed. Her laugh was softer. Her eyes lingered longer on silence. Floyd had been more than a brother. He was her compass, the one person who could still reach the barefoot girl who once sang to the trees. Losing him, she said, felt like losing the only map that led me home. And just when she was learning to live with that silence, another heartbreak arrived. Tever, Dolly's niece, was just 36 when the world lost her. A woman full of spark, swallowed by shadows she'd carried for years. Custody battles, loneliness, addiction, wounds the world couldn't see. Dolly didn't stand back. She stepped in, heart first. She paid for rehab out of her own pocket. She called. She hoped. She prayed. I just wanted her to have another chance, she later whispered, voice cracking. But sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes the song ends before the chorus ever begins. Tever's passing didn't come with headlines. No spotlight. Just a quiet goodbye in a small chapel, and Dolly, shaking in silence, holding a folded handkerchief, staring at the door as if willing her niece to walk through it one more time. In those months, her songs became softer, her silences longer. There were interviews where she'd trail off mid-sentence, her voice caught on something only she could hear. A memory, a ghost, a grief too deep for melody. Because even for Dolly Parton, who turned sorrow into symphony, there are losses too heavy for even the gentlest song to bear. Of all the songs Dolly Parton has written, the one she never got to sing out loud was the lullaby meant for her own child. When she married Carl Dean in 1966, she didn't dream of stardom or rhinestones. She dreamed of rocking chairs and baby shoes, of bedtime stories, of a voice, soft and sweet, calling her mama. Even at the height of her rising fame, that dream stayed folded in her heart like a secret melody. She imagined a small house in Tennessee filled with giggles instead of applause, fingerprints on the windows instead of flashing cameras. But life, as it often does, had other plans. In 1982, at just 36 after years of quiet suffering, Dolly underwent a hysterectomy. Endometriosis had ravaged her body. The pain she'd hidden behind smiles and sequins became impossible to ignore. The surgery saved her life, but it took away the one thing she could never get back. There were no headlines. No dramatic announcements. Just a woman lying in a hospital bed with her hands on her stomach, whispering goodbye to a child she'd never meet. She returned home to a silence she couldn't escape. The rooms were too quiet. The air too still. She said it herself. The lullabies I used to imagine, I started hearing them echo in the hallways. Friends say she set 2 plates at dinner out of habit, paused at baby store windows. flinched at the soft sound of a lullaby drifting from a passing car. It was the kind of grief without a grave. A future that vanished without ever being real. But Dolly never let her pain turn to bitterness. She gathered the pieces of that mother's heart and poured them into the world. Into her nieces and nephews. Into young dreamers who found hope in her music. And in 1995, she built something sacred, the Imagination Library. A gift to children she would never meet, books, stories, and belief in their little hands. If I couldn't have my own, she said softly, I could help raise everyone's. To date, over 200 million books have been gifted in her name. Not just as charity, but as legacy. The children may not know her story, but she knows theirs. And in every mailed envelope, in every bedtime story read under a flickering lamp, Dolly lives out the motherhood she was denied. Still, the ache never fully disappeared. It lingers in the quiet moments, the ones no audience ever sees. And she admits it. There are songs she's never written, songs that live inside her like whispers, melodies for a baby who never was, but is still loved beyond words. To the world, Dolly Parton was a hurricane wrapped in sequins, a larger-than-life voice, a woman who turned heartbreak into anthems and poverty into poetry. But to one man, Carl Dean, she was simply baby. He never chased her spotlight, never walked a red carpet, rarely gave interviews. While the world screamed her name, he stood quietly in the background, content to love the woman, not the legend. In a business built on appearances, Carl was her reality, her refuge, her porch swing at the end of a storm. For nearly 60 years, they built a life away from the cameras. He called her his little country girl. She called him the only person who saw her before the wigs, before the fame, before Dolly Parton became a brand. While the world demanded more of her, he asked for nothing. Just her time, her laughter, her presence at the kitchen table. And then, in 2025, that kitchen went quiet. Carl passed away at the age of 82. In the same Nashville home where they had shared morning coffee, whispered prayers, and lived out a love story no magazine ever truly captured. There were no paparazzi, no headlines shouting tragedy, just stillness, a quiet house. And Dolly, shattered. Friends say she didn't answer the phone for days. Meals went untouched. The woman who'd lifted the world with her music couldn't lift her own voice. And for the first time in her life, music betrayed her. She reached for her guitar and felt nothing. The chords felt foreign. Her voice, soaring, powerful, eternal, sounded thin, hollow. It felt like my songs left with him, she whispered. When it came time to say goodbye, Dolly planned the funeral herself, not as a farewell to a husband, but as a final love letter. In the small cedar chapel on their property, the same one where Carl often sat in silence, she filled the room with wildflowers he used to pick from their land. No gold, no glitter, just the kind of beauty he loved. Raw, honest, unstaged. She stood by his casket, holding a yellowed piece of paper, a letter he had written years earlier, labeled, "To be opened after I'm gone." Her hands trembled as she read it aloud. "You were always my shining star, but I never needed the world to know. Just you." And then, as the silence thickened, Dolly did something no one expected. She picked up the guitar Carl had given her before her first hit and began to sing, a song no one had ever heard. A melody she'd written decades ago, just for him. Her voice cracked. Her tears fell freely. And in that moment, every person in the chapel saw not a superstar, but a woman with her heart in pieces, saying goodbye to her anchor, her safe place, her home. Since that day, she still sets 2 cups on the table, still walks the halls they shared, still whispers goodnight into the dark, believing somehow he hears her. Because for Dolly, love didn't end with death. It just changed shape. It became memory, routine, echo. She once said, "I've written thousands of love songs, but he was the only one that ever truly mattered." She's spent a lifetime outrunning silence. From the hollows of Tennessee to the highest stages on earth, Dolly Parton kept moving, kept creating, kept giving, because stillness was a luxury she never had. But now, at 79, the woman who once lit up arenas with a single breath has entered a season she never planned for, one of stillness. It began quietly. Fewer public appearances, slower steps, a postponed tour. And then came the message from her sister Frida, posted in the dead of night, like a whispered plea into the void. I was up all night praying for my sister Dolly. She hasn't been feeling her best lately. I'm asking the world to pray with me. It spread like wildfire, not because of panic, but because people knew this wasn't a press release. This was blood calling out. And when someone like Dolly goes silent, the world leans in to listen. She canceled her Las Vegas residency for December 2025, moved the dates to fall of 2026. Doctors urged rest. Her team said she needed time. And for once, Dolly listened. Not because she wanted to, but because her body no longer gave her a choice. The same hands that once held guitars through pain, the same feet that stood for hours beneath spotlights, now trembled under the weight of decades. She calls it a season of stillness, a phrase soft and poetic, just like her. But behind it lies the quiet truth. The woman who carried the world's pain in her songs is now carrying her own. She spends more time at home now, in the chapel Carl built for her, among the flowers he planted, in the rooms where his laugh once echoed. She rises early, not because of rehearsals, but out of habit. 2 mugs on the table, one heart still searching for the other. And when she feels strong enough, she slips into her private studio. No producers, no deadlines, just her guitar, and the ghosts of every song she never finished. Her voice is softer now, less fire, more candlelight. But the notes still rise, thin and trembling like prayers sent into the dark. She doesn't talk much about the treatments, the fatigue, the ache. She smiles, shrugs, and says, "The Lord's got me. I've faced storms before." And she has, more than the public ever knew. But even for legends, there comes a moment when the world asks for less noise and more reflection. When it's no longer about what you can give, but what you still have left. For Dolly, that moment is now. But even in this quiet chapter, her heart refuses to dim. Her letters to fans still go out. Her charity still delivers books to children who've never heard her name but feel her love. Her laughter still slips through the cracks. And every now and then, someone close will say they heard her singing, just softly, in the distance. Because even now, in the hush between heartbeats, the music hasn't stopped, it's just resting. There are voices you forget, and there are voices that live inside you forever. Dolly Parton's voice, fragile but fierce, tender yet towering, has always been more than music. It's been medicine. For decades, she stitched our wounds with melody, turned our heartbreak into harmony, and offered grace where the world had given us none. But her greatest gift wasn't what she sang. It was how she lived. She took silence and gave it a sound. She took poverty and made it poetry. She took grief and gave it wings. And now, as her body slows and the spotlight softens, we're reminded that legends are not defined by their charts, but by their courage. By the way they keep showing up, keep loving, keep giving, long after the crowd stops clapping. Dolly once said, "I'm not afraid of dying. I'm afraid of leaving songs unsung." But the truth is, she's already written the ones that matter most. Not just in lyrics, but in lives touched. In books mailed to children. In fans who say her music saved them. In stories told in kitchens, on porches, in the quiet corners of hospitals, bedrooms, and heartbreaks. She belongs to no era. No genre, no mold. She belongs to the broken. The dreamers. The ones who've been through hell and still find a way to hum. So if you've ever been healed by her song, if Jolene helped you let go, if Coat of Many Colors made you feel seen, if I Will Always Love You helped you say goodbye, then now is the time to give something back. Say a prayer. Light a candle. Whisper her name, because legends don't vanish. They echo. And long after Dolly Parton has sung her final note, her spirit will still be humming through the hills, through the heartbreak, through us, a lullaby without end.